I'm going the wrong way. Oh, Henry with the overtake. Oh my God, oh my.
Hello and welcome to Whistler for this year's field test. And this is the Santa Cruz Bronson. It's 150mm travel at the back, 160mm fork, arguably one of the more enduro-y feeling bikes on test. And it weighs 33 pounds and 10 ounces. Like a lot of the other bikes, it has got frame storage, but unlike some of the other bikes, you can't hop between wheel size. And if you want a full 29, you'll have to go for the high tower. Santa Cruz say in their copy, this is a bike of Peter Pan disposition. I don't really know what that means, to be honest with you. However, we're here to review it. But before we get to that, let's tune in for our first impressions.
Bingo, bango, bongo. Whoa. Scoop. Oh. I'm pretty happy with this. Something feels uncomfortable in this fork, and I don't know what. Oh God, nearly washed the front. Bike feels really good in those sorts of slower speed type things. All right, I am gonna adjust the fork at the bottom. I'm telling myself this now. Oh, that feels a lot better, okay. All right, so a little slower on the fork. Happier with that. I like this, this feels good.
We're going to talk about our Santa Cruz Bronson, and to do that, we have our first impressions notes coming in. Oh. Can't catch.
Coming in hot, yeah. Let's see what we got.
That was an overhand throw.
So let's see, these are our questions and the first 3 words that Dario thought after he first rode the bike, because he was the first person on it, and so his first 3 words were, they're great. Dario says, this bike is easy, breezy, and beautiful. Is that the Bronson?
I mean, it's definitely like a hot pinkish color, so yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
Easy breezy. Yeah, I would say, you know, just jumping on this bike, especially going downhill.
Yeah.
You feel like pretty in control, safe, easy to go down the hill on.
Yeah, I don't know if I go with breezy as much. That makes it feel kind of like light and kind of floaty. It's more of a, it definitely has a little bit more of a plow for me. Like it's closer to that enduro thing, but.
Yeah, it still pedals really well,
yeah.
But yeah, definitely not as light and like chipper as some of those other,
yeah,
you know, shorter travel bikes we had there.
Let's start with some questions though, and we'll start with climbing questions. The first one, does the little wheel make it climb worse?
I mean, you can't say it like climbs worse because it can only take the little wheel,
yeah.
But in comparison to the other bikes that have 29 rear wheel compatibility, yeah, there's a little bit to draw on there. Like in terms of like rolling over objects, the 29 does better. Getting traction to the ground, yes, the bigger wheel does have a more footprint, and you can feel that. And it's not just like specific to the Bronson, but that is part of what they built the bike around. Yeah, any thoughts there?
Yeah, well, I cheated and I looked ahead at the next question. It says, how does it compare to the high tower? And the high tower is basically what is almost identical to the Bronson. They're the same geometry within like a few millimeters, and I've ridden both, and the high tower has 29-inch wheels and this one has mixed wheels. I would say the high tower does climb better. I think kind of like you were saying, the bigger wheels, they kind of churn and motor over some of the obstacles a little bit easier. So if you're looking for a climbing bike, I think the high tower does it, but then the Bronson shines in other areas. And I didn't think this is a bad climbing bike though. You know, like no. It climbs well. It's just maybe for the straight up getting over things, the bigger wheels make that a little easier.
Yeah, totally.
And it does have one big wheel, so.
One big wheel up front, climb switch, easy to reach, and you definitely feel more on top of the bike in terms of like height, but also very centered, decent amount of chainstay behind you. I still think it climbs well for the amount of travel it has.
Yeah, exactly. And Santa Cruz positions this as a pretty burly bike. I mean, they're talking, I don't remember all their marketing spiel, but basically, does it feel like a big, burly, heavy bike when you're climbing?
No, I don't think so. Like, you definitely have more traction with that extra travel in comparison to the shorter travel bikes. It's not quite as like sporty as like the lighter 29 bikes, But those are two sort of polar opposite ends of the trail bike spectrum, I would say.
Yeah, and they keep talking about how they're reducing the anti-squat to kind of give it better pedal feel as you're going up and down, basically less feedback through your feet, which if you go too far and drop the anti-squat too low, it can kind of make it feel, wallowy and mushy, but I didn't find that to be the case at all with this bike. I thought it had really good traction, and it's definitely a softer feeling bike compared to previous Santa Cruzes, like especially if you go a couple generations back. I think recently they've kind of all getting pretty good, but if you go maybe, let's say two generations back, but people that rode those would know that those bikes had that kind of really not quite locked out, but almost locked out feel when you're pedaling, and this is a different feel, almost closer to what you'd expect to feel like a horse link bike. But I kind of like the extra traction. At least around here, it was nice to have it really kind of clambering on the ground and gets you up things without too much feedback. We'll talk about descending. I'm going to let Matt read the descending questions because my hands are getting tired from holding this piece of paper. So,
okay, going downhill on the Bronson. What's the standout feature of the geometry here?
Standout feature. I think the balance for me, it feels nice. Like it's a mixed wheel bike, but some companies tend to make the mixed wheel bikes have a shorter chainstay. That was kind of like a trend for a little bit, but this bike actually has pretty reasonable chainstay length. So overall, I think it feels well balanced. Yeah, balance and stability, like adjectives come to mind for descending. Yeah, stability for sure. This is, like 27.5 rear wheel, but with a decent chainstay length. It's not super short, like you said. So, front to rear, like balance going down, like big steppy stuff. You don't get like shot off the back of it, but it's still pretty easy to turn with that smaller rear wheel. And then also like just sort of the stature of like where you are in the bike. You feel like you're standing up tall in a strong position, and that just gives you more confidence to like attack steep stuff. Yeah, it's got pretty high stack height, like a tall head tube length, and overall you are that kind of really upright, which it's not gonna be for everybody. Some people may end up running the stem a little bit lower and maybe even going lower rise bar if they really like that lower stack. But for me personally, I like a high stack. I like the front end of my bike up high, and especially a bike like this that kind of encourages you to go into steeper terrain. I really like to feel kind of upright and centered, and that's what this bike has. Yeah, and the head angle too comes into play there. Mm-hmm. Like they've slackened it out in comparison to the previous generation, only by a little bit, but they've done that here and there with, making the front end longer in terms of reach, slackening the head angle, and then also making the chainstay longer. So definitely leaning towards that descending focus aspect of the riding. Next one up, does the flip chip do anything? Talking about geometry. Yeah, the flip chip does something, but not much. I mean, you're changing your head angle by 0.3 degrees and your bottom bracket height by 2 or 3 millimeters. I mean, it's there. And Henry did say that he preferred the bike in the steeper setting. Like you and I just kept it low because we were happy with it. But, it's an adjustment. It just takes a few minutes to do, and it doesn't really add any weight or really, it's like a tiny bit of complication. So you do have it, but you don't have the extremes that you do with some of the other bikes, like the Rocky Mountain and the Specialized Stump Jumper. Those have tons of adjustments. You can really fully transform them geometry wise, but this one, it pretty much just has like one and has 2 geometry settings, but they're both quite similar. It's all about the fine tuning rather than big sweeping changes. Yeah, I never noticed like the bottom bracket being too low, and never felt like I needed to go higher or make the seat tube angle steeper. Like this bike shines in the steeper stuff, and that's where I rode it, and I didn't feel like it held back. When I was going uphill, I was like, okay, this is a bigger bike, but I'm gonna get there not as quickly as the sportier bikes, and then on the descents, like that's where it shines. So you just kind of like take that into account. Next one up, is this really a trail bike then? Yeah, I mean, we're gonna have a whole debate about trail bikes versus all mountain bikes versus other things. I don't think it's a trail bike. It's not a trail bike. I mean, but it depends where you live. If you live here, this could be your trail bike. If you're in Whistler, somewhere rowdier, but it's definitely on that. If you're making like the spectrum, where like cross country bikes here, downhill bikes are here, trail bikes are right here in the middle. This one's way over here more. It's definitely, you could race an enduro with this. You could race it as it is with the 36, but you could also put a burlier fork if you just wanted something stiffer. So yeah, you called it a mini Nomad before. Yeah. And it's a mini Nomad, but it's not even that mini. Like it's pretty close. So yeah, I don't know what to call it. I think all mountain bike is good. I like that term. Yeah, and like to draw comparisons to the other bikes, we have on test here, this has the same amount of travel as the Ibis Ritmo. Yeah, it doesn't seem like it. Feel like no, it's totally like that's a trail bike. This is definitely leaning towards the enduro end and could be a bike you're gonna race. Yeah, if you drop me on the top of some mountain with some gnarly descent there, and there's a Ritmo magically appears, and then the Bronson magically appears, I'm grabbing the Bronson. Like it's definitely the more downhill oriented, or just makes me feel better descending on it. Question number 4. Historically, VPP has been noted for having more pedal feedback.
Is that something you can notice on the trails here?
Yeah, I think in the past that was the case, but like I said, in the last couple generations, Santa Cruz's bikes been less anti-squat and does help with the amount of pedal feedback. And I'd say this bike felt pretty neutral. Like I didn't feel like my feet were getting tugged too often. Yeah, we rode plenty of rowdy stuff, especially where you might have noticed pedal feedback in the past, is if you get like a sequence of slow speed, kind of steppy terrain, it could just feel a little bit harsher. And that's not the case with this bike. So yeah, I'd say that the steps they're making are paying off.
So behind me, we have, of course, the Santa Cruz Bronson, and we're going to talk about how easy this bike is to live with, as well as some observations we had about the bike's spec. So it being a Santa Cruz, a good place to start is actually the bearings. Not only do these tend to be really easy to swap, but they also have a lifetime warranty. So you can just send them in and get some new ones free of charge, which is a real nice touch. Now, as spoken about in the review, there is the Hightower, which is kind of the same bike, but with a 29-inch rear wheel. That means that this bike doesn't have the ability to flip between sizes, although there is a small geometry adjustment flip chip just at the eyelet of the shock there. Now, we've all found this bike to be quite noisy. That is something you might want to look at trying to remedy on the chain slap. So you could put some of that sort of VHS kind of damping tape on the underside there, maybe have a look at how you can quieten the bike down. In terms of the components and some of their dimensions, it does have a 180mm dropper. Now, I know that sounds like plenty, but you can see from how much exposed seat post we're running that it could go to a 210 very, very easily. I also found personally that that bar, I think it's 35mm, could also be just a little bit lower. It's got a great deal of stack height, this frame, and although not universal between all the testers, I'd be really curious personally to try this with a slightly lower cockpit. Finally, this bike comes with the SRAM Mavens, which are a very powerful brake. Two notes to observe here. Firstly, it's 180mm rotors front and back, but thanks to the power of the system, that's very adequate. Secondly, this is the bronze tier. Now that means it doesn't have that reach adjust dial that you might find on their higher end brakes. It's not something that we're insisting that it's crying out for, but it's worth your consideration. All in all, this bike is very easy to live with, and it's also got a well executed frame storage. Another thing I like about the bike is when you're washing it, it tends to drain out of the bottom of the frame and doesn't kind of gather or pool anywhere in terms of water or the mud you're trying to wash away from the frame. But that's about it from me. Let's get back to the review and see what the pros and cons of this bike.
And now it's time for some pros and cons. We'll have Matt kick it off with some cons.
Okay. First one, yeah, the chain slap, it was more audible than some of the other bikes. Number two would be the climbing. Like, it's a good climbing bike for what it is, but it's not the snappiest bike. And, if other people are out there looking for a trail bike, they might be a little bit confused. And this does draw on how close it is to the Hightower. Like, similar geometry, definitely aimed at like the same types of trails, but you can't flip between wheel sizes on either frame. Like, you got to pick one frame from the get-go. So both good bikes, but yeah, there is like that sort of crossroads you need to make.
Yeah, not quite as much versatility. You just don't have that range of adjustment options, which some people like to have. That's fun to experiment. And this one is not as much you can do.
Yeah.
But
so pros, what's great about the Bronson?
pros, descending. I think all of us are in agreement. This is probably one of the best, if not the best descending bike out of this crop of bikes that we have here. So super good in the descents. I think it's just like balanced geometry. Geometry works well. It's mixed wheel, but it doesn't feel like there's any compromises. It's designed around two different size wheels, and I think that works well.
Yeah. So it's pretty plush.
Yeah.
Like, just plush. You know where it is in the travel. Just feels like controlled, composed. No surprises there. Like, good bottom out.
Yeah, comfortable bike, especially in rough terrain.
So. You push it for sure.
I think that kind of wraps that part up, but now we should go into who exactly this bike is for. Mm-hmm. So, person out there, they're looking for a trail bike, maybe looking for an all mountain bike. Who do you think's the ideal candidate for Bronson?
Yeah, definitely somebody who's going to be pushing, features on a trail ride. Like, they're not going out doing any like huge free ride moves, but they want to like pop around, hit some jumps on the trail that are harder to get to. You got to pedal to, ride some slabs, take it in the bike park. It's sweet on there. And then just, somebody who's going to pedal all day and be ready to like sacrifice that quick uphill for like the bomber descent.
Yeah, you're kind of someone definitely more descent oriented, kind of searching out the rowdier moves. It's almost one of those bikes where you kind of feel like the person that wants it knows that it's for them. Mm-hmm. It's a little bit hard to describe, but yeah, either way, you're going to want to have descending high in your list of priorities. Climbing's on there, but not as high.
Cool. That wraps up the review on the Bronson. Be sure to stay tuned to the channel for all the other videos coming from this field test. And
you can head to the Pinkbike homepage to check out the written reviews. You should also hop in the comments. Let us know if you think that the Santa Cruz Bronson actually is a trail bike. Is it an all mountain bike? What do you think it is? Let us know. We'll read them and we'll see what we think as well.